What's gaming, gamers? Today, I've got a Stasis Warlock build for you that doesn't require you to use the Osmiomancy Gloves to be viable. This build synergizes specifically with the Ager's Scepter Trace Rifle, which can be acquired via the Monument to Lost Lights at the tower if you don't already own it. If you don't have Ager's Scepter and don't have the means to buy it from the Monument to Lost Lights, the Vergless Curve Exotic Bow is also a decent option, although it requires a slightly different build. I won't go over that specifically in this video, but if enough people would like me to post an alternative version of this build with Vergless Curve as the focus, I will do that. As for the exotic armor to run, this build takes advantage of the Mantle of Battle Harmony exotic chest piece. But before I get into the meat of the video, I would like to shout out our clan, the Tyrant Seraphs. If you'd like to find some new people to play Destiny with, whether that be playlist activities, raids, fishing, or anything in between, I've left a link to our Discord server in the description. We run pretty much all content in the game, and we're constantly looking for more people to run more stuff with. If you're looking for like-minded people to learn from, or just to play some Destiny with, join the Discord server. Back to the video, I'll now describe what the Mantle of Battle Harmony exotic chest piece does in case you're not aware. Mantle of Battle Harmony has the exotic perk Absorption Cells, which is a perk that will be granted to you upon getting weapon kills that have an elemental affinity which corresponds to your subclass. In this build's case, that would mean any stasis weapon final blow will proc Absorption Cells. While your super is not charged, getting any weapon kill with a matching subclass element will grant you the Energy Siphon buff for 2 seconds, which will grant you 3% of your super's energy while active. The 2 seconds for which Energy Siphon is active serve as its cooldown, meaning you can only get this extra 3% super energy every 2 seconds. However, once your super is full, weapon kills with a matching subclass element will grant you a 4 times weapon surge to the element that corresponds with your subclass for 11 seconds. 4 times weapon surge is a 25% buff to weapon damage, meaning while this buff is active, all of your stasis weapons will deal 25% more damage. Any stasis weapon kill will refresh this buff to its maximum of 11 seconds, meaning so long as you're getting kills with stasis weapons and your super is fully charged, you'll effectively have an infinite 25% damage boost. With you now knowing what Mantle of Battle Harmony does, I'll get into the subclasses build. I'll start by putting everything on screen as a prescriptive setup, if that's what you prefer, and once I've done that, I'll detail why I've chosen everything as well as alternative options should there be any. For your super, run Winter's Wrath. Run the Healing Rift, whichever jump you prefer, the Penumbral Blast melee, the Cold Snap Grenade, the Glacial Harvest aspect, the Ice Flare Bolts aspect, Whisper of Chains, Whisper of Conduction, Whisper of Fissures, and Whisper of Rhyme. To detail the subclass, firstly the super. Winter's Wrath is a decent super, and I believe it's slept on quite a bit. It's very strong for crowd control, and while it doesn't have the same damage output as Behemoth Titan's Glacial Quake super, it's still very good for keeping enemies frozen and getting yourself or your teammates out of a bad situation. As such, Winter's Wrath is the perfect super for this build, as it doesn't merit use on cooldown. You can have Winter's Wrath fully charged and only pop it when you need its damage resistance or strong crowd control capabilities. This lets yourself take advantage of Mantle of Battle Harmony's 25% damage boost without suffering too much from the lack of super usage. For your Rift, you can really run either the Healing or Empowering Rift. Empowering Rift's 20% damage boost will stack with Mantle of Battle Harmony's 25% damage boost for a total of a 50% damage boost, but I don't find that to be significant enough to warrant its use over the survivability of the Healing Rift. Healing Rift will heal you at a constant rate of 40 HP per second, which is faster than that of even Tier 10 recovery. Additionally, while at full health, Healing Rift will apply an overshield to you at a rate of 3 HP per second, up to a maximum overshield of 15 HP. This simply increases your survivability while inside the Healing Rift, and it makes it a better option over the Empowering Rift in my opinion. However, if you enjoy using the Empowering Rift, there's no problem with doing so. Its increased damage capabilities can and will help you clear adds more efficiently and take out majors more effectively, so there's no problem running it either. For the melee, Penumbral Blast is the only option, but it's not a bad one. Penumbral Blast will instantly freeze any target hit with it, as well as any enemies directly nearby the enemy hit. This makes it very good for instantly taking a major enemy out of the fight, allowing you to deal damage to them or clear other enemies while keeping them frozen. When paired with the Ice Flare Bolts aspect, Penumbral Blast's effectiveness is increased even further, but I'll talk about their synergy shortly when I go over the aspects. Onto the grenade, the Cold Snap Grenade is the one to choose. The Cold Snap Grenade will cause a Seeker to be summoned upon contact with the ground that will track enemies for 1 second. If the Seeker makes contact with an enemy, it will freeze that target and summon another Seeker that will search for other enemies. The Cold Snap Grenade can summon up to 2 additional Seekers, meaning it can freeze up to 3 enemies with 1 grenade. For the aspects, firstly run Glacial Harvest. Glacial Harvest will cause stasis shards to be created upon freezing enemies, with the amount of stasis shards created varying based on the tier of enemy frozen. Rank and file combatants will summon 1 shard, elites will summon 2 shards, and champions, mini-bosses, and bosses will summon 3 shards. After having created 6 stasis shards, a 10-second cooldown will be enacted, during which no stasis shards can be created. Stasis shards themselves are good for this build, as when collected, they will grant you 10% melee energy. This is very helpful for keeping your Penumbral Blast's uptime consistent, in turn increasing your instant freeze capabilities. Second, run the Ice Flare Bolts aspect. Ice Flare Bolts will cause a Tracking Seeker to be summoned upon shattering a frozen target, which will seek out nearby enemies to the one shattered and freeze them upon impact. This Seeker will be summoned every time an enemy is shattered and can be effectively chained indefinitely to different frozen enemies so long as there are enemies within its range to freeze. Ice Flare Bolts will do very well to ensure you're continuously freezing enemies, as the Seeker will be summoned when freezing enemies via any source. Onto the fragments, firstly Whisper of Chains. Whisper of Chains will increase this build's survivability significantly, as it will provide a 40% damage resistance to all incoming damage while you're within 10 meters of any frozen enemy or stasis crystal. This fragment also increases the skill ceiling of the build, allowing you to leave frozen enemies frozen instead of shattering them so as to ensure you're receiving the damage resistance when you need it. Lastly, Whisper of Chains will increase your recovery stat by 10 points, which is a nice boost especially as a warlock, as the recovery stat dictates your rift's cooldown. The second fragment is Whisper of Conduction. Whisper of Conduction will cause any stasis shard within 15 meters to track to your position. This tracking occurs 1 second after having entered the 15-meter range of a stasis shard, so it isn't exactly instant. However, collecting stasis shards is very important for this build, and having them tracked to you makes it such that you don't have to put yourself out of position to collect every single one you create. Additionally, Whisper of Conduction will grant you plus 10 to both your resilience and intellect stats, increasing your armor's overall stat potential significantly. The third fragment is Whisper of Fissures. Whisper of Fissures will increase both the size and damage of the blast created when shattering either a frozen target or a stasis crystal. As this build will be freezing targets incredibly often, the increased damage dealt by shattering enemies will allow you to deal with higher health enemies more efficiently. The increased damage of the burst will also help you to clear adds more effectively, especially as this build can generally only freeze one target at a time. The fourth fragment is Whisper of Rime. Whisper of Rime will cause stasis shards to either heal you or grant you an overshield, depending on how much health you have when you pick up a shard. If not at full health, stasis shards will grant you 12 HP upon pickup, and if you are at full health, they will instead add 12 HP to an overshield that caps out at 100 HP. This overshield will last for 10 seconds if not broken by enemy damage, and picking up additional stasis shards will refresh the overshield's duration back to 10 seconds. As this build will be creating stasis shards very frequently, Whisper of Rime will be procced just as often, increasing the overall survivability of the build. As for alternative fragments, there are 2 options you can swap in if you'd prefer their benefits over the current fragments. Firstly, Whisper of Bonds. Whisper of Bonds will grant you an additional 2.5% super energy every time you defeat a frozen target, which will allow you to charge your super faster, in turn receiving Mantle of Battle Harmony's buffs sooner. With how often this build will be freezing targets, you'll receive this super energy very frequently, and your super will charge noticeably faster, especially when combined with Mantle of Battle Harmony's boost to super regeneration. Unfortunately, Whisper of Bonds comes with a minus 10 stat deficit to both your discipline and intellect stats, which makes it a less attractive option than others in my opinion. The second alternative fragment is Whisper of Hunger. Whisper of Hunger is very simple. It will increase the amount of melee ability energy gained by picking up stasis shards from 10% to 17.5%. This decreases the total amount of stasis shards required to fully regenerate your melee ability from 10 to 6. Only needing to pick up 6 stasis shards is very helpful, as you can only create 6 stasis shards every 10 seconds anyways. This means you won't have to wait out that 10-second cooldown to refund your melee energy, and will mean you have your Penumbral Blast melee up significantly more often. However, Whisper of Hunger comes with a minus 10 stat deficit to both your mobility and recovery stats. The lowering of the mobility stat is negligible, as the mobility doesn't affect this build in any meaningful way, but losing out on the recovery will lower your passive healing as well as increasing the cooldown of your rift. With the subclass build now done, I'll get into the armor setup for this build. I'll go over my recommendations for stat distribution, then lay out a prescriptive armor mod setup, and finally detail each armor mod chosen and explain why I've chosen it. Firstly, for stat distribution, in the top 3 stat grouping of mobility, resilience, and recovery, spec into resilience first with recovery second, and ignore mobility altogether. Resilience will grant you an additive 3% damage resistance to incoming damage for every tier of the stat, up to its maximum of 30% damage resistance at tier 10. This is significant for survivability's sake, and as such, I recommend either tier 9 or 10 resilience. The recovery stat will do a number of things for you. The higher the recovery stat you have, the lower the delay between having taken damage and the start of your health and shields regenerating. It also increases the rate at which you regenerate both your health and shields, making passive health regeneration significantly faster overall at higher tiers than lower tiers. Furthermore, recovery is the Warlock's class stat, which means the higher your recovery stat, the shorter your rift space cooldown will be. All of that makes recovery a very worthwhile stat to focus into, and I recommend being at a minimum of around tier 6 or 7 recovery. Mobility is a stat with the least impact in most gameplay scenarios. The tier of mobility you have will dictate your walking speed, strafing speed, crouch movement speed, and initial jump height. As none of those are necessary for this build, you can ignore mobility altogether, as the only thing you'll notice is a slightly shorter jump. In the bottom 3 stack grouping of Discipline, Intellect, and Strength, spec in a Discipline first and then Intellect and Strength equally. Discipline will govern your grenade ability's base cooldown, allowing you to have your grenade available to throw more often. Discipline decreases the base cooldown as a percentage per tier of discipline you have, but it isn't a linear decrease. I recommend between tier 8 and 10 discipline, as those tiers will give you between a 50% decrease at tier 8 and a 61% decrease at tier 10. As the Cold Snap Grenade is a large part of this build due to its instant freezing capabilities, it's very useful to have it up as often as possible, and a higher discipline stat will help you to do that. Intellect is a bit of an oddity as a stat. Yes, it will help you regenerate your super faster, but not exactly in the way you may think. Kills will always grant you the same amount of super energy no matter what your intellect stat is. However, dealing damage will charge your super at a varying rate depending on the tier of super you're running, as well as the type of weapon you're running. I'll refrain from getting into too much detail about intellect now because frankly it's beyond the scope of this video, but I'll likely be making a video about all 6 of the armor stats at some point in the future. For this build specifically, with Winter's Wrath being a tier 2 super, my recommended level of intellect is tier 5. If you happen to have high intellect armor, tier 6 is also good, but lower than tier 5 will see a significant drop in the amount of super energy gained. However, it also doesn't matter too much, as Mantle of Battle Harmony will be generating you a large amount of super energy, you'll be generating Orbs of Power frequently, and the Whisper of Bonds fragment, if you choose to run it, will also grant you extra super energy. Basically, get as close to tier 6 intellect as you can without going over, and without sacrificing resilience, recovery, or discipline. Lastly, a simpler stat to explain, Strength. Strength will simply lower the base cooldown of your melee ability, allowing it to passively recharge faster. As we'll be collecting stasis shards and orbs of power for the melee ability, the strength stat isn't super important to spec into and can be sacrificed in favor of discipline and intellect. My armor stats have me at 22 mobility, 102 resilience, 90 recovery, 70 discipline, 54 intellect, and 41 strength. Onto the armor's mods, I'll first put everything on screen as a prescriptive setup. Once I've done that, I'll go into detail about what each mod does and why I've chosen it for this build, as well as any alternative options should there be any. On your helmet, run 2 Harmonic Siphon mods and 1 Special Ammo Finder. On your arms, run 1 Grenade Kickstart mod, 1 Impact Induction mod, and 1 Momentum Transfer mod. On your chest piece, simply run whatever resistance mods you need for the content you'll be running. On your legs, run 1 Elemental Charge mod, 1 Innervation mod, and 1 Recuperation mod. On your bond, run 2 Bomber mods and 1 Outreach mod. To detail the armor's mod setup, firstly the helmet's mods. The 2 Harmonic Siphon mods will cause rapid stasis weapon final blows to summon a more potent Orb of Power. The potency of the Orb of Power simply increases the amount of super energy gained, but as charging your super as fast as possible is a requirement for this build's damage output, the potency of the orb matters. The Special Ammo Finder will simply help to summon more special ammo for you, which will be beneficial as Ager's Scepter is the cornerstone of the weapon loadout for this build and requires special ammo to function. Alternatively, if you don't feel you'll need as much special ammo, you can forego the Special Ammo Finder in favor of a 3rd Harmonic Siphon, which will further increase the potency of the generated orb. Onto the arms mods, firstly the Grenade Kickstart mod. Grenade Kickstart will refund you grenade energy upon the throwing of your grenade depending on how many stacks of armor charge you have when you throw your grenade. As this build doesn't take advantage of any charged up mods, the maximum refunded energy with 3 stacks of armor charge is 31%, which will help your grenade's uptime significantly. If you don't have any stacks of armor charge, Grenade Kickstart will still function and will refund you 12.9% grenade energy upon the use of your grenade. Next, the Impact Induction mod will grant you 20% grenade ability energy upon dealing any melee damage. Importantly, the melee damage dealt doesn't have to be powered melee damage. Your unpowered melee attack will still proc Impact Induction. Impact Induction does have a hidden internal 7-second cooldown, and as such, can only be activated every 7 seconds. However, the increase to the grenade's uptime is valuable as it increases your freeze uptime, which is necessary for this build's overall effectiveness. Lastly, the Momentum Transfer mod will grant you 20% melee ability energy upon dealing damage with your grenade. Momentum Transfer also works on a hidden 7-second cooldown, but the 20% melee ability energy will be beneficial for recharging your Penumbral Blast, especially when Glacial Harvest is on cooldown and you can't summon any stasis shards. When using the Cold Snap Grenade, the Momentum Transfer mod will proc if the Seeker hits a target, so you don't have to directly impact an enemy with the grenade in order to reap the benefits of the mod. As an alternative option, if you'd like to build fully into grenades and leave the melee regeneration to the stasis shards, you can swap out the Momentum Transfer mod in favor of a second grenade kickstart mod. This will increase both the minimum and maximum grenade energy funded when throwing your grenade. With 0 stacks of armor charge, you'll receive 17.15% grenade energy after throwing your grenade, and with 3 stacks of armor charge, you'll receive 37.8% grenade energy after having thrown your grenade. Onto the chest pieces mods, simply run whatever resistance mods you need for the content you're running. Resistance mods of the same type stack together, with one resistance mod granting you a 15% resistance to its specific damage type, 2 mods granting you a 25% resistance to that damage type, and 3 mods granting you a 35% resistance to that damage type. The different resistance mods stack together multiplicatively, so I won't describe each interaction specifically here. If you don't feel you need all 3 mods dedicated to resistances, you can run a Harmonic Reserves mod to increase the amount of ammo you can carry for stasis weapons. With no reserves mods, Ager's Scepter can hold 447 total ammo, 97 in its magazine and 350 in reserves. With one Harmonic Reserve mod equipped, Ager's Scepter can hold 495 total ammo, again 97 in its magazine and now 398 in reserves. You get about half a magazine extra ammo with one reserves mod equipped, so if you feel that's worth it, go ahead and use a Harmonic Reserve mod. Onto your legs, firstly, the Elemental Charge mod will contribute a percentage to a hidden counter upon the collection of an elemental pickup that, upon reaching 100%, will grant you a stack of armor charge. For stasis shards specifically, with one elemental charge mod, each stasis shard will grant you 25% to this counter, meaning every 4th stasis shard collected will grant you a stack of armor charge. This is simply extra stacks of armor charge and will ensure you're refunded as much grenade energy as possible with the grenade kickstart mod in your arms. Next, the Innervation mod will grant you 10% grenade ability energy upon the collection of any Orb of Power with no cooldown. This build will be generating Orbs of Power frequently, and as such, you'll be granted this grenade energy very frequently. Innervation will help your grenades uptime significantly and is very useful for keeping enemies frozen as constantly as possible. Lastly, the Recuperation mod will grant you 70 health upon the collection of an Orb of Power. Recuperation has no cooldown and will grant you the 70 health every single time an orb is collected. Recuperation is a very good survivability mod and is very helpful for ensuring you stay alive while collecting Orbs of Power. As collecting Orbs of Power is a large part of this build's loop, with it granting super energy, armor charge, and grenade energy, Recuperation making the collection of them safer is very helpful. As an alternative, you can swap out either the Innervation or Recuperation mod, whichever you find less useful for you, in favor of a second Elemental Charge mod. Having a second Elemental Charge mod will increase the armor charge stack percentage gained per stasis shard collected from 25% to 34%. To simplify that, equipping 2 Elemental Charge mods means you only need to collect 3 stasis shards to be granted an armor charge instead of 4. This means you'll be granted 2 stacks of armor charge every 10 seconds, which is the Glacial Harvest aspect's cooldown after having summoned your 6th stasis shard. If you find yourself struggling to either create or collect Orbs of Power, equipping a second Elemental Charge mod could be useful, as stasis shards will track to you when nearby them, suggesting you have the Whisper of Conduction fragment equipped. Lastly, for the armor mods, the Bond. First, there's the 2 bomber mods. These 2 mods together will grant you 25% grenade energy upon the casting of your Rift. Similarly, the 1 Outreach mod will grant you 20% melee energy upon casting your Rift. Both of these mods are mods that can be used either actively or passively. If you notice you need grenade and or melee energy, you can cast your Rift and be granted a significant amount of energy instantly. Alternatively, you can use it passively and simply be granted that energy when casting your Rift when you normally would. It's entirely your decision how to use these mods, and they'll suit either active or passive play. Alternatively, you can swap out any one of the 3 mods slotted in the Bond for a Reaper mod. Reaper will cause your next weapon final blow after having cast your class ability to summon an Orb of Power, which will grant you super energy, armor charge, ability energy, and health. This is simply a free Orb of Power and is a guaranteed Orb of Power if you need one. It is somewhat infrequent as the Rift's cooldown is longer compared to both the Hunter dodges and Titan barricades, but Reaper is still a nice mod for a guaranteed Orb of Power, so slot it in if you'd like. If you were to slot in the Reaper mod, I'd recommend you use it in favor of one of the Bomber mods, as you'll only lose 5% grenade ability energy when casting your Rift by removing one of those mods. And that's all for the armor build. Now I'll talk a bit about my recommendations for an overall weapon loadout, and then detail a few specific weapons I recommend running. Firstly, in your kinetic slot, run Ager's Scepter. This build is designed specifically for Agers and will function less efficiently with a different stasis weapon. I'll detail exactly what Ager Scepter does shortly, but first I'll go over the energy slot. In your energy slot, as the weapon doesn't generally see use unless it's the only weapon you have ammo for, I like to have a shoot to loot weapon equipped. Shoot to loot will collect both ammo bricks and orbs of power when shooting them. When shooting an ammo brick with shoot to loot, it will also reload all 3 of your equipped weapons from reserves, whether you picked up a special or heavy ammo brick. This is very helpful as it completely avoids having to reload any of your weapons at all so long as you have ammo on the ground to pick up. Shoot to loot working with orbs of power is also a nice bonus, as you can shoot an orb and be granted all of the buffs you'd get if you were to have picked it up normally. This lets you shoot orbs from a safe distance or collect orbs you otherwise couldn't, which will help with survivability. As for specific weapons, the only special weapon to be able to run shoot to loot is the Path of Least Resistance Trace Rifle that was acquirable during the Season of the Seraph. Currently, the only way to get this gun is to wait for either Banshee or Xur to be selling it, so if you choose to use shoot to loot, you may have to use a primary weapon. That would lower your overall ammo drops and may not end up being worth it. Try it out and see how you like using it, but if you don't have the Path of Least Resistance Trace Rifle with shoot to loot, I'd probably recommend either using a different trace rifle altogether or a special grenade launcher. Trace rifles and special grenade launchers are fairly ammo efficient and will help increase your ammo drops by making your loadout have 2 special ammo weapons. As for the heavy slot, here I prefer running a Stasis machine gun. A Stasis machine gun will be good for both decent boss damage and clearing adds and majors when your Ager Scepter has run out of ammo and you want to generate more special ammo. A Stasis heavy grenade launcher could work too, but I don't find heavy GLs to be in a great spot right now, and as such I lean towards machine guns. As for specific Stasis machine guns to run, there are only 3 in the game. The rapid fire frame recurrent impact machine gun from the Season of the Risen, the high impact frame Cullum's Terminus machine gun from the King's Fall raid, and the adaptive frame chain of command machine gun from the ritual playlists during the Season of the Haunted. Of these 3, only Cullum's Terminus and Chain of Command are currently acquirable, with Recurrent Impact being a weapon that will require you to wait for Banshee or Xur to be selling one. As such, I won't talk specifically about Recurrent Impact, but instead detail the other 2 weapons. Cullum's Terminus is acquired via every encounter in the King's Fall raid except the Daughter's encounter, and is craftable. It's a high-impact machine gun, so it has a smaller base magazine size and a slower fire rate, but it does more damage per bullet than both of the other machine guns I've mentioned. Perks that are nice in the 3rd column are either Stats for All or Heating Up, but I lean more towards Stats for All as it simply gives more buffs than Heating Up does and doesn't require kills to proc. In the 4th column, Wellspring, Firefly, and Headstone are all decent choices. Wellspring will increase your ability uptime by granting your abilities energy every time you get a kill. Firefly will cause enemies to explode upon being killed with precision damage, dealing solar damage to nearby enemies. It also grants you significantly increased reload speed after having gotten a precision kill, which is very beneficial for a machine gun. Headstone will cause a stasis crystal to be summoned at the location of any enemy killed with precision damage. Chain of Command can be acquired via the Monument to Lost Lights in the tower under the Legacy Gear section for the cost of 75,000 Glimmer, 100 Legendary Shards, 2 Enhancement Prisms, and 1 Ascendant Shard. As Chain of Command was a ritual playlist weapon, it has set perks in its 3rd and 4th columns. The perks in its 3rd column are Adrenaline Junkie and Osmosis, while the perks in its 4th column are Demolitionist and Adaptive Munitions. In the 3rd column, Osmosis won't do anything for this build as it's already a stasis weapon, thus throwing a grenade won't change its damage type. As such, Adrenaline Junkie is the clear option. In the 4th column, Adaptive Munitions can be good if you're in higher level content as it increases damage done to unmatched enemy shields, but Demolitionist will be better for this build as it will grant you 10% grenade energy per kill with the weapon. Now I'll explain what Ager's Scepter does in case you're not fully aware. Ager's Scepter has the exotic perk Ager's Call, which will cause enemies killed by Ager's Scepter to explode in a slowing burst. The burst will apply 100 stacks of the slow debuff to any enemy within 100 meters of the one killed, which will instantly freeze any of those enemies. This makes Ager's Scepter exceptionally well suited for clearing groups of enemies, as killing just one can cause you to be able to create a chain reaction of shattering explosions, damaging and killing enemies very efficiently. Ager's Scepter's exotic trait, Riga's Refrain, will refill 10 ammo to the weapon's magazine from reserves every time you get a kill with stasis damage. Ager's Scepter's Catalyst is where this weapon becomes very interesting. While your super energy is full, you can hold your reload button to grant you the Will Given Form buff, which consumes your super energy and increases the effectiveness of Ager's Scepter. When you proc Will Given Form, 20% of your super is instantly consumed, and the last 80% will drain at a rate of 2.6% energy per second. This effectively grants you the Will Given Form buff for 30 seconds, during which Ager's Scepter receives a slew of buffs. As soon as Will Given Form is activated, Ager's Scepter's magazine is overflowed to 192 ammo, is granted an 80% boost to damage, and hits on enemies will apply 20 slow stacks to them for 4 seconds. Manually reloading Ager's Scepter while the buff is active will cancel the buff, ceasing the consumption of your super's energy where it is when the reload animation finishes. Stowing Ager's Scepter while the buff is active will also cancel the buff, similarly ceasing the consumption of your super's energy where it is when Ager's Scepter has been stowed. Lastly, when your super runs out of energy, the buff will also cease. This makes Ager's Scepter a very useful weapon, and increases the decision-making possibilities with this build, as you can decide whether to consume your super to further increase Ager's Scepter's effectiveness for a short time, or keep your super and the lower but consistent buff in case you need it to get yourself out of a bad situation. With weapons now done, I'll get into a quick playstyle that suits this build. It's really very simple. Freeze everything, generate super energy, and freeze everything more effectively once your super is fully charged. In order to freeze everything, use your Penumbral Blast melee, use your Cold Snap grenade, and use Ager's Scepter. To generate super energy, get kills with Ager's Scepter to summon Orbs of Power, collect those Orbs of Power, defeat frozen targets if running the Whisper of Bonds fragment, and just deal damage and kill enemies. Once your super is full, simply continue freezing and killing any enemy you come across. Deciding whether to consume your super's energy with Ager's Scepter or save it if you think you might need it can be a tough decision depending on the content you run, but I find it to be simply a question of playstyle. Do you have an incredibly aggressive playstyle where you prefer to be in the fray? If so, keep your super charged without using it for Ager's Scepter, as you're more likely to require it to get yourself out of a bad situation. If you find your playstyle is more passive overall, making proper use of cover, aggressing when required, but also retreating when necessary, feel free to consume your super for Ager's Scepter's Catalyst. As you can simply swap weapons to stop the consumption anyways, if you've killed all the enemies you need to kill with it, you can simply stow Ager's Scepter and still be left with super energy towards your next super. Lastly, if you run out of ammo for Ager's Scepter, simply swap to your machine gun and kill enemies with it. You'll have plenty of special ammo in no time, especially if you're running a special ammo weapon in your energy slot. And that's all for the video. Thanks for watching. I will be posting more often in the coming weeks. I've just been very busy the last little while and haven't been able to put as much time into YouTube as I've wanted. I'll also attempt to diversify my content slightly, moving away from being a build guide centered channel and more towards a tutorial-esque channel. I've not decided exactly what the first video of that sort will be, but I've got a couple of ideas. Anyways, again, thank you for watching and have a great day.